Hello and welcome to the latest installment of the Positive Psychology Leaders Series, brought to you by the International Positive Psychology Association, also known to all of us as IPA. I'm David Paulet, your host and founder of the Positive Psychology Leaders Series. I'm an executive coach and the author of two books. One, The Law of the Garbage Truck, How to Stop Others from Dumping on You and How to Stop Dumping on Others, and the book, The Three Promises, How to Find Joy Every Day, Do What You Love, and Make a Difference. I'm thrilled to be here. You'll hear in just a moment a little bit about our special guest, someone who taught one of my graduate courses at the University of Pennsylvania. Just an honor and a pleasure that he's here today. But I want to tell you, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Positive Psychology Leaders Series features presentations, interviews, and question and answer sessions with leading researchers and practitioners in the field of positive psychology. The program has been operational since the beginning of the founding of IPA, so we have a great archive of presentations going back to Marty Seligman and Mike Csikszentmihalyi, Sonia Lubomirski, and soon, I hope this doesn't give it away what's happening today, but soon Barry Schwartz will be in there too. So this is a big day for us. So what you can do after this presentation, if you haven't already done that, is look through some of these presentations. We also have just recordings of some really great programs. What I want to share with you now, just a couple updates. Two things. We have the IPA Work and Organizations Division is seeking submissions for its new publication. This is actually its second issue. This is titled Positive Work and Organizations Research and Practice. They're taking submissions, and if you go to the IPAnetwork.org, that's IPPA network.org, you'll find all the submission guidelines and for all the details. But congratulations to this division, the Work and Organizations Division. This is exciting to have a second publication now, definitely underway and soon to be published. Get those submissions in there. We'd love to see it. We're also proud to announce we've got two great folks who will follow Dr. Barry Schwartz. Fred Luthens is going to be joining us in April, and Angela Duckworth, who has a book coming out on grit shortly, and she'll be with us. Both of them are fantastic, and so we've got a great spring lined up. Well, I want to tell you, I've been looking forward to this presentation or this interview today for some time. The conversation about work and why we work is something that affects all of us around the world. And it's not just an interest for people who coach or train or teach. It's really all of us at some point in our lives, and for the most part, our membership is comprised of people who are working right now. So it affects us in so many ways. So it's our pleasure to have a esteemed positive psychology leader in the world, one of the leaders of positive psychology since its inception. And so I want to introduce you to him, but let me tell you what's going to happen in this call. We're going to do an interview, so we're going to welcome you to start submitting questions like now. So any questions that you have for Dr. Barry Schwartz, you can start submitting them through the question and answer panel in your webinar control panel. And if you can, keep those questions tight, sort of short if possible. It makes it easier for us to share them with Dr. Schwartz. And tell us where you're from and give us your name so we can identify or acknowledge you on the call. So, start thinking of the questions that you have. We're going to start off with a number of questions that we have for him from our team here. But let me introduce you officially to Dr. Barry Schwartz, and then we'll welcome him on to the call. He is a professor of psychology at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, great school. Dr. Schwartz has written 10 books and more than 100 articles for professional journals. He's also published in all the magazines and newspapers around the world, like the New York Times, for example. 2004, Dr. Schwartz published The Paradox of Choice, Why More is Less. It was named one of the top business books of the year by both Businessweek and Forbes magazine, and has been translated into 25 languages. And just a fantastic book. Dr. Schwartz has also published Practical Wisdom, The Right Way to Do the Right Thing with his colleague Ken Sharp in 2011. Now, his new book, where much of our call will be focused, but feel free to ask questions of anything that you would like to of Dr. Schwartz. But our call is focused quite a bit on his new book called Why We Work, which was published in September. And Dr. Schwartz has spoken several times on the TED stage, not just TEDx, but I've spoken on the TEDx stage, and that's really cool. But the TED is like the rock star of presentations in the world, and his talks have been viewed by more than 12 million people. 12 million people. Pretty awesome for anyone, and very cool for a psychologist. So without further delay, let me welcome to the program and jump on the line with him. Welcome Dr. Barry Schwartz. Hey, Barry.
Hey, David. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, great to have you on. Really appreciate it. First thing I just have to ask you, in one of the bios that I had for you, it actually said, I have to say, I saw it, so I don't feel like I'm going to tell something I shouldn't, that you received your PhD back in 1971 at the University of Pennsylvania. And I just had to ask you, did you ever imagine that you would give a talk that would be viewed by 12 million people?
Are you kidding? I didn't even imagine that 10 minutes before I gave it.
Yeah, it's just incredible.
It is. In fact, when I was invited to give that talk by the guy who runs TED, Chris Anderson, he said, I run this meeting called TED. Would you like to give a talk? And I said, what's TED?
Yeah.
And that's what almost anybody would have said. At that point, nobody knew what it was. It didn't have an online presence. It didn't have anything like the visibility that it came to have. So I perfectly nonchalantly said, yes. Little did I know what would happen.
Yeah. And if I remember right, it's an honor to be invited to do any presentation, and if you get on the TED stage once, that's a big deal. And if I'm right, you've been on 3 times. Is that correct?
Yep.
Wow.
No, it's a total honor, no question.
That is really awesome. That's super. Well, we're going to dive in. There are just so many of us who are thrilled to be doing this with you. So the first question, just to ask you, you've just like paradox of choice, just to tell you, like when I go to the grocery store, I can't help but think of you. Or if I'm in New York City and I go to one of the diners and they have 500 items to choose from, I just can't help but think of you. And I was telling actually one of my daughters the other day about the idea of maximizing versus satisficing, and it's so powerful. So, but in practical wisdom, so you've just done so many things over the years. I just wanted to ask you, what's your inspiration for focusing now on why we work? Where did that inspiration come from?
Well, it's an interesting question. I've been thinking about questions of motivation for almost my entire career. And there's a kind of ideology that characterizes most Western societies, and certainly the United States, which is that, people work for pay and then they use their pay to have fun. And this always, the training I got was in the psychology of B.F. Skinner, who basically said that everything that creatures do, they do for rewards and punishments. To get rewards or avoid punishments that have no intrinsic connection to the acts they're engaged in. Whether it's a rat pressing a lever for food or somebody in a factory pressing pants for a paycheck, that's the nature of work. This always struck me as wrong, and I've been, sort of consumed by it for essentially my entire career, though I never really did any work on it directly. And then I was invited to give a talk at TED a few years ago, and I decided I would talk about this, which I did, and they asked me if I'd turn it into a book, which I did. So this has been with me forever, but it hasn't been part of my public self until fairly recently. Just to give you an idea, 40 years ago, I was teaching a class on the psychology of motivation, and I did an experiment. Everybody in the class, I held up the grade sheet on the first day of class, and everyone in the class had a B. And I said, this is your grade in the class, and it doesn't matter what you do, you're getting a B. There'll be a midterm, there'll be a final, there'll be a term paper. I'll grade all of them, but no matter how good or bad they are, your grade in the course is a B. So just to be clear, there's no reason for you to do anything in this class except that you're interested. That was the experiment.
Wow.
And it was a complete catastrophe. By the end of the semester,
I can imagine.
There were 5 people coming to class out of 45. I got 3 or 4 papers turned in. It was an abysmal failure. It started out great. Everyone was enthusiastic, but then their work demands in other classes just kept growing and growing, and they said, well, I'll catch up in this one when I have a spare moment, except they never did. And that was that.
Wow.
So that was a sad revelation to me.
Yeah, and so say more about that revelation. What
well,
struck you?
It always what was really distinctive about Swarthmore students. They're very smart and talented, but they really seemed driven by the desire to understand and know, and maybe use that understanding in ways that make the world better. Grades really seem to be secondary. And so I figured if there's a group of people on Earth where I could do this experiment and demonstrate that there are people who work just to do this kind of work because of the sheer joy of thinking and learning and stuff, it would be this group of people. And I think they really are that way, but the real life gets in the way.
Yeah.
And it got in their way. And I think they felt bad about themselves as a result of this. And I came to realize in retrospect that what I had done was extremely unfair to them, because they'd spent their whole lives relying on tests and grades to help structure their lives. And I was just taking all that away, and they had nothing there to replace it.
That's fascinating. It's interesting. And, interesting thinking about when you mentioned so many years ago that just the section in the book, Why We Work. If you're just joining us, we're with Barry Schwartz, author of Why We Work. Just you telling some of the stories of you and your work experience was just great. Yeah, just really got it. Just just even back then, tell us just a little bit back then about what you sort of experienced and ultimately came away from as an understanding of work.
Sure. Well, these were all summer jobs. I've been really fortunate that the only real job I've ever had is the one I have now and have had for 45 years. But one summer I worked in a clothing factory, and my job was to bring work to people who were pressing the clothing, or to inspectors who were pulling loose threads and making sure it could go out, get shipped. And it was about 1 million degrees in the factory, and it was horrible. All day long in a sweat box, doing nothing but carrying work to be done by others and getting yelled at because they wanted more work because they were getting paid by the piece. The next summer I had a job which was worse, though I didn't expect it to be. I had to spend 40 hours a week pretending that I had something to do under the watchful eye of all my bosses. And I really didn't have much to do. So you have any idea how long a 40-hour work week is when you don't really have any work to do?
Yeah.
Every week felt like an eternity.
Yeah.
So and then I worked very hard one summer in another factory, but this one was owned by my mother and her brother-in-law. A very small factory, it was hard. We hardly lived in the lap of luxury. But now, because I had a real stake in the enterprise, since it was my family, I relished the work. I kept on thinking about how I could make the stuff that I was doing go faster, be more efficient, and that sort of thing. It was mindless, potentially mindless work, except that I was engaged with it because I cared about the project, and that taught me something about what makes work worthwhile.
Yeah, that's a little for those joining now. I think people will remember that conclusion as we go further into our interview with you. But let's start sort of with the problem, as you were talking about some of those first jobs and what people experience around the world. The statistics being that you cite that 90% of the world's population are just really not that engaged with their work. Why do so few people, Barry, get satisfaction? Or why do so few people get satisfaction from their work?
Well, I think that what it takes for people to get satisfaction from their work are some of the following characteristics. Ideally, all of them. You need a certain amount of discretion and autonomy in what you do. You need some variety in what you do. You need the respect of your supervisors and your peers. You need to feel challenged. You need to feel like you're learning on the job. And I think most important, you need to find meaning, which usually means that somehow at the end of the day, you have made somebody's life better. And I think work that has these attributes, even if what you're doing on a day-to-day basis or hour-to-hour basis isn't fun, is work that gets you out of bed in the morning. You wouldn't work if you didn't get paid, but it would be inaccurate and unfair to say that the reason you work is that you are getting paid. And I think starting with the Industrial Revolution, starting with Adam Smith, the father of classical economics, the presumption was that people didn't want to work, that people were basically lazy, and if they could, they would just do nothing. So you have to get them motivated, and the way you get them motivated is by paying them. And if you're paying them, it really doesn't matter what they do. So all of the effort that went into structuring the workplace was focused not on giving people work to do that they felt proud of and were eager to do, but in maximizing efficiency, which often meant that people did the same mechanical, repetitive thing over and over and over again, that they could do it with very little training, which was ideal because if they left, they could easily and quickly be replaced by somebody else. And so work was just a nightmare, but it didn't matter since they basically believed that any work would be a nightmare. So why not just make it efficient? And then they live their lives outside the workplace, and they take advantage of the growth and prosperity that comes with industrialization and division of labor. So that kind of set the tone, and we saw it in the development of the factory system, assembly line style production through the 19th and 20th centuries. And this ideology is very hard to shake. Every now and then, there'll be a movement in management theory that focuses on the more humanistic side of work, and it attracts a lot of fans and a lot of attention, and efforts are made to reshape the workplace, and it never lasts. It's popular for a little while, and then it sort of goes away and gets replaced by another efficiency, profit-driven impulse until the next fashionable wave of enlightened management appears 20 years later with the same ideas and slightly different terminology. And part of the point of my book was to try to explain why it is, in the face of, I think, overwhelming evidence that it's the wrong way to organize work, even if you don't care about the workers, that this idea simply won't die.
Yeah, and tell us more about that. Why is it that this old idea of organizing work that goes back to behavioralists like B.F. Skinner, why is it that something like that has not gone away and is not yet going away?
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons, and it goes back far before Skinner. In fact, Skinner arguably was merely in creating his own theory, was describing the world he saw, which was a collection of people trudging off to factories every day, doing work they didn't want to do just because they got paid. I think there are a couple of reasons. One is the ideology of sort of the economic view of the world. It just pervades the way we think about and understand almost everything, and that's been true for a century and a half. There's a whole collection of managers who desperately want to control what's going on. And the more people can vary what they do, have autonomy on their tasks, get satisfaction out of the work that's not just about the paycheck, the less control the manager has. So I think the kinds of things I'm suggesting are threatening to the management level of organizations because they make the manager less central and less in charge. So they resist efforts to give more autonomy to the worker, because the more autonomy the worker has, the less significant their role is.
Yeah, there's a question that just stood out so much for me in the book, and it was, why wouldn't we want to design a workplace that enables its inhabitants to get real satisfaction out of the time they spend there?
Exactly.
And so why wouldn't we? And it sounds like that from your research that there are people, some of these managers and leaders are threatened by people with autonomy. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is, but there's also a kind of dynamic which I try to explain in the book. You postulate that people want meaning and engagement and challenge in their work, and I look around at what I see, and I see workers coming into work completely uninterested in what they're doing, just mailing it in, can't wait until Friday, would quit their job in a heartbeat if they could get a job that paid them more. And I look at this and I say, what are you talking about? None of the people I see working have any of the attributes that you're describing. So you, Barry, must be out of your mind. You're living in a fantasy world. And I think what people don't realize is that when you create workplaces that have a certain character, you create human nature that tracks the character of the workplace. So you're not catering to the laziness and lack of interest in work in human beings. You're creating it. And if you created a different kind of workplace, you would have people who wanted to make a difference, wanted to be engaged by their tasks, wanted to devote energy and thought to what they were doing, wanted to get better at what they were doing. But the workplaces that we have created, all of those attributes are just blocked from manifesting themselves. So it isn't just that managers want to retain control, it's also that we create people in the image of the theory that led us to create the factory system in the first place. And the counterexamples are so striking. I don't know how many of the people on the call have had experience in a retail chain called the Container Store.
I have. Definitely.
They sell containers, these plastic bins and stuff, shelves for, people have bought too much stuff and now they have to find some place to store it all.
Right.
But you walk into these places and it's really quite astonishing. Everybody there seems to have the attitude that their job is to solve your problem, whatever it is. And if that means selling you less than you come in to buy, that's fine. If that means selling you nothing because they've convinced you you don't really need what you came in to buy, that's fine. Their job is to make sure that every customer leaves satisfied. That's what motivates them. They know their stock, they know their inventory, they're full of useful information, and they're joyous in their interaction with customers. Now, maybe everybody's on drugs, but it seems to me there's something about the management commitment of that company that inspires people to see themselves as serving customers and not selling to customers. And that makes all the difference.
Yeah, there are two things that come to mind there that are very powerful in the book. You make the case that there is a need to build systems that help bring out the best, that leave room, give space to employees to do their best. And then you also talk about employees that no matter what system they're in, find meaning in their work. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and maybe.
Sure, I've collaborated on a few things with a wonderful psychologist named Amy Resniewski, who teaches in the business school at Yale, and she studies organizational behavior, and her main take is that people can craft their jobs as long as they're given a little bit of space. They don't have somebody looking over their shoulders, and they're not being sped up and worked so hard that they can't do anything except their stated tasks. They can craft their jobs, and some people who have the attitude that it's all about the paycheck will turn their job into something that's all about the paycheck. And other people who interpret their jobs as serving people and improving the world will turn their jobs into activities that in some way serve people and improve the world. So she thinks that there's a lot that can be done at the level of the individual to to encourage people to think differently about the work they do, which will in turn almost certainly change the work they do. And I think she's right, but my focus has much more been on the structural characteristics of workplaces that either facilitate or impede efforts for people to get meaning from their work. So there will be people who, under the worst of circumstances, will extract meaning from what they do. But that's not most of us. Most of us need an environment that encourages it, an environment that encourages us to take risks, take chances, take initiative, think for ourselves and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So she and I have, we both agree that both things matter. The structure of the environment matters and the character of the individual matters. But she has more sort of confidence that individuals can do a lot to make bad jobs into good ones. And I'm less confident that that's true.
Yeah, I'd probably ride the middle and say if I were starting a company today, I'd bring you in and Amy. And
I think that would be an excellent idea.
Right, what a combination, right?
It would be a great combination, and she's got kids' college tuitions to pay in a few years, so I'm sure she wouldn't mind the consulting fee.
There you go, even better. And she's at my alma mater, so at Yale University. And,
yeah.
So that would be fun.
She's a great person to have on this.
Yes, she is.
Event, by the way.
Yeah, and that's actually. I'm glad you mentioned that. We actually have a recording of Amy, and so for those of you who are not familiar with Amy Resniewski's work, Dr. Schwartz just shared that with you. But go back into the archive. There's a real great recording that did touch Barry on the crafting jobs and crafting work, and so we're going to have to pair. Well, as we go back out to the membership, people who are not able to be on this call live, we'll have to tie the two presentations together. Barry, one of the things that you had talked about in the book in a chapter called "How Good Work Goes Bad." You talk about how incentives often have surprisingly negative impacts, or has a surprisingly negative impact on performance.
Yep.
I think so many of us, we're just incentives and are all around us. It seems. Could you tell us a little bit about why that is that these incentives have those negative effects, and then maybe what we should do instead?
Well, it's interesting. I don't think we know why that is. We do know that it does happen. That it seems illogical if you only have one reason to do something, and I give you a second reason, like a financial incentive. Your motivation should be greater, and you should be more persistent. But sometimes the second motive, the incentive, weakens the first motive and essentially undermines it. And there are lots of examples when you give nursery school kids awards for drawing. They are less interested in drawing in the future. They were drawing because they wanted to make great pictures or because it was fun, and now they're drawing for an award. It becomes work, so you're turning play into work. You try to get parents to come on time to pick up their kids from daycare, so you fine them if they come late, and lateness increases rather than decreasing, because in effect the fine gives parents permission to come late and undermines any notion that they have responsibilities to the daycare center staff to show up on time. So there are lots of examples of this, and we tend to operate, I agree with you, as if incentives are the magic bullet. You want kids to do better in school, give them, McDonald's coupons for doing their homework, or a pizza party if everybody achieves some level in math or whatever it is. How else can you get them to learn? The idea that you might get them to learn by finding a way to make the stuff they're learning interesting and relevant to them, I guess teachers have given up on that, or it hasn't occurred to them. So that is the path of least resistance, is to find some bribe that will get people to do what you're trying to get them to do for other reasons. And sometimes, it has modest effects in the direction that you want. And when the situation is desperate, as in many urban school settings, I can easily understand why people will reach for any tool they can to make even a modest improvement. But the notion that this is a replacement for people learning because they actually are interested in learning is just folly. And there's not a shred of evidence that you can bribe your way into academic excellence.
Yeah, it's interesting because it just sparks this idea that these systems that you're referring to, with the incentives in particular, that we assume that everybody is motivated the same way.
Yep.
And I'm struck with this idea that came from just reading the book and watching your TED talk, that individuals, if we really want to understand, if it's not here, let me try this out, and you tell me if this is something of what you're communicating through the book. That if we have a system that really promotes engagement and communication and conversation and shared work and autonomy, that and allow for a conversation to happen between a manager and employee that says, how do you like to be recognized at work, or how do you like to communicate when things don't go so well, or things of that nature, that would allow for individuals to communicate that which motivates them, versus, which could be could have nothing to do with incentives, but have all to do with the content of the job. And so that the system and then the individual communication together could lead to some really positive outcomes. Is that
absolutely? And there's something profoundly disrespectful in using incentives. It's sort of a way of telling people that you don't trust them to do a good job just because it's the right thing to do. You don't have to bribe me to do my job. Of course I'm going to do my job. Why are you bribing me? Is this what you think of me? And so I think what ends up happening is you demoralize the employees, and you just can't make up for that by bribing your way out of it.
Yeah, that's so very interesting. One of the things. I'll just ask this question, and you reference it. Amy Rasniski's research might approach this a little bit more, but I hear a lot of people saying that their job is just not that great. And in fact, you hear people talk about the research that people don't leave companies, they leave their manager, which I think is a double tragedy, that a manager could be so poor that it would have that impact on an employee, but also that an employee would leave a good company because of a bad relationship with a manager. But wondering, what your thought might be on when it comes to finding meaning in your work, whether that comes through the system or comes through the individual. When someone says that they want to leave their company or that they want more meaning in their work, any thoughts, Barry, on what you would say to them in terms of how they could find more meaning in their work versus feeling they have to leave their job, leave their company in order to find meaning somewhere else?
Right. Well, here's where Amy's approach, I think, can be telling. Anybody who works in retail has the possibility of thinking about what they do in the way that the people at the Container Store think about what they do. Somebody comes in to buy a pair of jeans or a sweater or a new refrigerator, it doesn't matter what. And you can view your role as your task as, how do I make a sale? Or you can view your role as, how do I meet a need? And if you have the latter attitude, it seems to me, then every interaction with a customer is a kind of partnership between the salesperson and the customer to figure out what the need really is and then figure out the best way to meet it. So that just transforms your workday. You have 100 people coming in the store in a given day, and this is 100 lives you can improve. That's quite something. But you need the space to do that. You need the space to be able not to make a sale sometimes because these people shouldn't be buying anything, or to sell a lower priced or a lower markup item because that's really what will meet these people's needs, and to spend a lot of time with the customer so you actually get to know what it is they need and why. And if you're under pressure from your manager to meet targets, then all that goes out the window. And all you're doing is trying to sell anything to anybody as fast as you possibly can. And then it becomes all about the money.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because as you touch on, when we both know when companies move into layoffs or tight, businesses on the downswing, that oftentimes the things that we consider beneficial towards creating more meaning at work, creating a better work experience, get considered sort of the fluffy stuff, and get cut. Budgets for training and communication and meetings are cut as a result. And that, in your book, you point out that can lead to a downward spiral where it gets worse.
Yeah. It gets worse because once that starts, then your work is less. You do your work less well, and when you do your work less well, you get more, management oversight and more reliance on incentives, which makes you even less inclined to do your work well. So it creates a kind of downward spiral. And there's a guy at Stanford named Jeffrey Pfeffer in the business school, also a management person, who wrote a book some years ago called The Human Equation: Building Profits by Putting People First. I reference it in my book. And what he shows, he does a sort of survey across different industries, and it's pretty much true across every industry he studied, that the companies with the best, most humane workplace practices are the most profitable companies in their industry, across the board. So it's not only bad psychology and maybe mean-spirited to mistreat your employees in this way. It's bad business.
Yeah, and so here's a question I'll bring in from Alejandra Leon from, I believe she is, well, just to say right now, I don't know where she, from Mexico, from our neighboring country of Mexico. And she
Hello, Alejandra.
All right. And she asks, how would you advise supervisors to understand worker satisfaction so they are not threatened?
Well, this is a challenge. I think there's something inherently threatening about giving up control to the people you're supposed to be managing. But you have to be willing to take the leap. First of all, you need to have confidence that if you loosen the reins, good things will happen rather than bad things. And you have to find a way to get comfortable with exerting less control over the people you manage. Now, the trouble, of course, is that you're being managed too. So you do this unilaterally, but the people who sit above you are not the least bit happy with this, and you pay a price. So you need to feel a certain amount of autonomy in your role as a manager in order to give the people you manage some autonomy in their role as line employees, which is why I think this attitude about empowering workers and giving them the opportunity to get satisfaction out of their work really has to run from the very top of the organization all the way to the bottom.
Yeah, that's, this, if you're just joining us, by the way, you're with Dr. Barry Schwartz, who wrote his most recent book is Why We Work. And it's interesting when we were talking about meaning with your work, Barry, the fact that if companies and leaders around the world get this message, and they've 10 million people rather have already seen your talk on TED, TED.com. You can really talk about meaning in your world, in your work. Tremendous. The ripple effect of companies around the world making these changes would be just immense.
It would be, but I'm not confident that anybody's going to make any changes.
Well, that's so that's a question that Andy Proctor asks. He's participating from California, and he wonders, kind of a trend question. Do you think that the benefit corporations are moving? Are corporations moving in the right directions with regard to employee satisfaction? Right.
I think they are, and in fact, I think there's real pressure being applied from two sources that may actually produce a change in work much more than my book does. One is women. Meaning and significance in work is more important to women than it is to men. And as women occupy a larger and larger percentage of the workforce, they may just insist on it. and they may force the people who manage them to change their management practices. And the second is millennials. Everything I read and the contact I have with my students nowadays suggests that they are, in general, quite willing to sacrifice pay and other material benefits for work that they think makes a difference. That doesn't mean all of them are like this, and some of them, even if they wish they were like this, can't be because they have so much debt that they have to, from college, that they have to pay off their loans and take the highest paying job they can. But if you want to attract the best young employees and keep them, you are not going to be able to do that with salary. You're going to have to do that by giving them work to do that they think is worth doing. And those two trends, plus this existence of a structure, the B Corporation, where it's sort of built in, it's baked into the very existence of the corporation that they're there to make the world better in some way, may really produce a sea change in what work is like. Although it'll probably, it's not going to happen overnight.
But it will, yeah, and that's interesting. You said that Andy actually had a follow-up there that talked about the B Corporation. So you have some hope there that there's even more possibility for change with the B corporations.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I think it's a very positive sign.
That's great. We've got just a bunch of questions. I'm going to pepper a few in here with you. One of the questions is just sort of summarized. Jody Fissler asked a question about employee awards, and a couple other people have a similar question. And there's almost an industry around employee awards.
Yep.
And there's definitely a tradition of them all around the world. What's your thought in terms of, what should we do with them? What should we do with all these award programs that are had?
Well, this I think is a complicated question. I think whenever you give an award of any kind, you're doing two things, and the two things are different. You are, on the one hand, giving something to somebody that has hedonic significance, right? A bonus makes you can use that bonus to sort of like it's like getting a food pellet if you're a rat. The second thing you're doing is you're giving feedback, right? You don't get these awards unless you've done good work. So it's a way of telling people that they've done good work. I think feedback is crucial. I think people have to know whether they're working well or not working well, or working even better than well. The hedonic side, I think, is where the trouble lies, because it can become, people who are not working in order to get that award can be transformed into people who do work in order to get that award. And that is likely in the long run to make them less outstanding employees. So I think acknowledgement is incredibly important. I think regular acknowledgement, routine acknowledgement, like the annual bonus that's baked into your compensation, is a terrible idea. I think extraordinary acknowledgement under at irregular intervals under extraordinary conditions is much less likely to have that negative effect on motivation. And the trick really is to find a program of awards, rewards, whatever you want to call them, where you can give people feedback, acknowledge their excellence, but not dilute their commitment to the task. And it's not easy to do. I know that Google, I've done a little bit of consulting with them over the years in an informal way. Everybody at Google makes plenty of money, and they just can't reward people with money because everybody's got all the money they need, and they struggle. What can we do that will really acknowledge and be meaningful to somebody who's given above and beyond the call? And they struggle to find things, and I think their view is increasingly that you need to find the right thing for the particular person. It could be a little time off. It could be a trip someplace. You know, if you're an outdoorsy kind of person, a trip somewhere to climb a mountain or what have you. Something that acknowledges both the excellence and the individuality of the person involved, and something that is really an extraordinary and not a routine event, not to be expected. But they struggle with it, and I'm not sure they think they've figured it out. It's really a challenge.
Yeah, it's very interesting, too, that you point to Google. Years ago, I worked for Yahoo, so Google's, well, I still love Google anyway. But very interesting in the New York Times, there's an article just recently on Google and finding out, you know, what is it that really helps teams succeed more on the job. And some of the findings, or the principal findings, seem to come down to having an opportunity for the team members to connect with each other on a more than just work item basis, but more of getting to know people for who they really are. And when they were given the opportunity to get to know each other better, that they actually performed better across the organization than those who did not have any opportunities for personal and professional connection.
I think that's right. And there was they've been doing a lot of work at Google on figuring out what makes a good team versus a bad team.
Yes,
and it has,
right.
And there's no algorithm. There's no formula. It really is very much team specific. They find, you know, democratic and egalitarian teams that are good and bad, and they find hierarchical teams that are good and bad. So it depends on the mix of people. What does seem to matter is, as you might put it, soft skills, like good listening, being empathetic, seem to be, so that people feel like they're being heard, seems to matter to any group structure and on any particular kind of task.
Yeah, that's awesome. We're getting overwhelmed with questions, Barry. This is I think I joked before we started that we were going to keep Dr. Schwartz on this call till 9 p.m., but I think I probably could, given the number of questions. Here's a question from Monica Rangel, and looking at just the economic uncertainties. How, Dr. Schwartz, do you keep employees engaged in times of uncertainty?
Well, it is a challenge in times of uncertainty. The book I'm writing I wrote is a book where, you know, people don't have to worry in principle that they're going to lose their job tomorrow. And in a time of extreme economic uncertainty, I have a feeling that the kinds of issues I write about become much less important to people. They do have to pay their rent and pay their utility bills and take care of their families, and the paycheck gets larger and larger in importance when you can't take it for granted. I think the trick is, what a typical management tool is to capitalize on this uncertainty and have people coming into work afraid every day they're going to lose their jobs, because what can be a better motivator than that? And I think that's exactly the wrong strategy. Then you have people going through the day afraid to stick their necks out, worried about risking failure. And so if they're in a position where they actually have to use their judgment, they won't.
Yeah.
So the trick is to find a way to give people as much job security as you can. But then you can have sort of a situation like is the case in many public schools, where no matter how bad you are as a teacher, they won't fire you, and that's no good either.
Yeah.
So, giving people essentially a job for life in an environment where people where people aren't motivated to do the job well is a catastrophe.
Right.
Giving people a feeling that they have a job for life in an environment in which people are motivated to do the job well is a real, I think, bonus.
We talked before that you are going to be entering another phase of your life with a form of retirement from Swarthmore. We'll be doing so much more. I think you've got enough. There's enough here to work on for the rest of your life. So I don't think
probably
really,
so.
Right?
Yep.
Just talking about
this is my last 6 weeks at Swarthmore.
It's incredible. We're for those of you again, joining the call, Barry Schwartz is on with us talking about Why We Work, his most recent book, and TED Talk by the same name. He has some of the greatest people in positive psychology are coming for a symposium to honor him for his retirement. And that's a real tribute to you, Barry. I mean, that's really awesome.
It is awesome. I feel very much like it is a tribute, and I'm deeply appreciative.
Yeah, it's really great. Well, hey, we're going to take advantage of this 6 weeks with a couple more questions. Back to Pfeffer's research, finding the overlap between qualities that make a successful company and those that make for a good work experience. Evan Schmiedehaus asks a question, essentially, how can we successfully appeal to executives and business decision makers regarding implementing and maintaining employee well-being and developmental programs?
You know, I wish I knew how to answer that. It would seem to me you give them Pfeffer's book to read, and they should come back the next day ready to turn the organization upside down. But clearly that doesn't happen. So I just don't know. I don't know, where all the resistance comes from. Maybe it's, they feel threatened, as we already said. Maybe they imprinted on one model of how to run an organization and they can't let it go. But it seems to me that the evidence would almost be malpractice to run an organization in the way most more organizations are run in the face of the evidence that you're leaving money on the table by doing it.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know what to tell you about how to produce changes at the top.
Well, that's the one thing that's interesting about the International Positive Psychology Association. We have a lot of practitioners on the call and researchers, and so there's research opportunities there, and then practitioners for how do we help communicate this message that you've put out. We'll start by making sure everyone watches your TED Talk, then read the book, then go to Pfeffer's work. But there's something on page 87, and I thought I compliment to you. I love your teaching voice. I thought it would be fun for us just to hear you read one paragraph.
Sure.
On page 87, at the top of that page, if you'd read that paragraph, and here's the preface to it, is that there are some questions that it seems that you have suggested that are pretty important for us to ask if we really want to come up with design a different work experience. So with that in mind, if you'd start off the top of 87, read that first paragraph, that would be awesome.
Sure. This is at the very end of the book. People on the call should appreciate this is a very short book. This is a 90-page book.
You can read it pretty quickly, which is awesome.
Yeah. It places a great burden on us when we appreciate that by designing our institutions, we are also designing ourselves, the people who inhabit the institutions, at least in part. But this is a responsibility we must all accept. And the first step to taking responsibility over the structure of our workplace is to start asking questions. When it comes to the design of work, we must ask why. What is the purpose of this work? Will the purpose of the work inspire people to do their jobs as Luke did his custodial job in the hospital? Luke is a hospital custodian that I write about earlier in the book. We must ask what. Is the product of our work something that will actually provide a benefit? Are the results of our transactions with customers positive sum, so that both sides leave the transaction better off? It will be much easier to inspire our workforce if the answer to this question is yes, even if we aren't saving lives or saving the earth, if we are making the lives of the people we serve at least a little bit better. And we must ask how. Are we giving workers the freedom to use their intelligence and discretion to help solve the problems they face every workday? Are we allowing them to work without close supervision and trusting that since they want to do their jobs well, they will?
Yeah, thank you for reading that. I just was moved when I read that to think if managers, if leaders, and this touches on questions that were asked, created the space and had the confidence to ask some of these questions, boy, wouldn't the quality of the work experience change and potentially the focus of what's important and what's not on the job, rather than just doing things because they're on somebody's work list, that could really change.
Yep. No, I think that's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. And when you appreciate that people spend half of their waking lives or more at work, you know, who wants to spend half your life at a place you don't want to be, doing a job you don't want to do?
Yeah.
Especially when it's just so unnecessary.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a whole bunch of questions that continue to come in regarding additional practices or good or best practices that help create the workplace that we're aiming to achieve through why we work and what we're advising. Is there anything else that you would want to emphasize in terms of what?
Well, one point that Pfeffer makes is that the bonus culture is almost always a bad idea. You want to acknowledge people, but you don't want bonuses to be regular routine. He says it's a good practice to pay more than what you have to. It's a show of confidence and respect. So pay more than the market wage. It's a good practice if you are going to distribute the benefits of success, to distribute them across the company. So, you know, in that way, conveying a sense that the project is something we're all in together, and it's a project that everyone contributes to, and that everyone has a role to play in. So he does make those kinds of suggestions. And I think, by the way, it's also probably a good practice if times are hard, and there have been a few companies that have done this. Instead of laying people off, you cut everybody's hours and keep everyone employed. For the same reason, we're all in this together. We all benefit when things are good. We all suffer when things are bad. Everyone is important. A handful of companies have done this. Most companies don't. They just lay people off, and layoff is just a polite word that we have come to use to replace the word fire. It's not like you're laid off and you get a call in 2 weeks that says come back.
Right.
But that's what happens, and when you do that, you destroy an enormous amount of social capital that you might have built up over a period of years, because everyone's worried if they're going to be next, and it just poisons the entire atmosphere.
Yes, right. Which then devolves into that downward spiral.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, you know, sometimes bad things happen in workplaces and you have no alternative. But it shouldn't be the move of first resort. It should be the move of last resort.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are closing in on the top of the hour, which for me is sort of sad because there are just so many questions that others have and I have, because the work is just so stimulating and so relevant to all of us. But let me ask the magic wand question, at least in terms of research. Barry, if you had the magic wand, or now you do actually, I've just passed it to you, and we were looking at what research you would like to see conducted to help us better understand the possibilities for making work great and the workplaces better, what research would you be interested in seeing done?
Well, I think what I'd like to see done is, I mean, the work is there, but why not do it again? I'd like to see an effort at a real random assignment study where different arms of the same enterprise, different arms doing essentially the same task, get different workplace structures, different salary structures, different incentives, different kinds of supervision. And you measure not only the how people feel about their work, but also the quality of their work and their productivity. And if you could show sort of decisively within a company that doing the system X way is less productive and produces less satisfied workers than doing it the system Y way, it would be pretty compelling evidence. But it's evidence that, as I've been trying to indicate, I don't think we need, because we already have it. So I must say, at this stage of the game, I'm more interested in some of the questions that your listeners have been asking, which is how do we get people who run organizations to change what they do, since I'm pretty convinced that they should. And I don't know, we need more data, or there's a magic study that will, lift the scales from their eyes and convince them that they have to do something different. The trick is, what's the way in to these people who run organizations? And I don't know the answer to that. That's the nice thing about spending my whole life in an ivory tower.
Yeah.
I've never actually had to work for anybody who has to make a profit to survive.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, you just provided a serious bit of about a motivation for, in a meaningful way for all of us, that you've really opened it, let it stand that the research is there. It demonstrates the power of business growing and being stronger when we engage in giving employees autonomy and opportunities to bring out their best. But how do we convince businesses to do it? For all those practitioners in IPA around the world, you've heard the call from Dr. Schwartz that, boy, if we can figure that out, we can make companies more successful and ultimately the world a better place.
You can change the world.
Change the world, right?
Yep.
So with that, everyone, the book is called Why We Work. It follows the TED Talk that Dr. Schwartz did that's just been viewed by so many people around the world. Why We Work, great book. Read it. I went to a Starbucks here and had a couple cups of hot tea and a great read. So I encourage people to pick it up, share it with their executives, and again, thank you, Dr. Schwartz, for joining us. And Barry, we also know that you are retiring from Swarthmore in 6 weeks, so we're honored that you have put us on your farewell tour. So
it's really been a pleasure. It's been a great conversation. I'm glad the folks in the audience seem to be interested enough to generate all these questions, and I wish you all well if you try to implement some of these ideas.
And you have such a busy. I started as a kid to say Kobe Bryant, for those who follow basketball, is retiring from the Lakers, so he's on this farewell tour. Your schedule is so full. A couple questions came in. If someone had a research question or a thoughtful practitioner question, is there a way to contact you without burdening you, or is just
email me?
Yeah, email you.
Yep.
Do you want to share that email address, the best one for you?
BSCHWAR1 at Swarthmore, SWARTHMORE.edu.
Oh, that's awesome. We'll send that out in writing as well. And this was not planted, I promise everyone on the call, but who just demonstrated openness than Dr. Barry Schwartz, who just says, look, feel free to get in touch. That's really awesome. Modeling the behavior. So with that, I want to just thank, as we close up here, Executive Director James Pawlowski for all of his work supporting the organization and supporting this series in particular. Our President, Barbara Fredrickson. Our producer of the series, this wouldn't get done without the great work of Jenny Brennan. Our technological and social media director, Sydney Rubin, the same thing. Just these two are just such a joy to work with. I just want to thank you again for joining us. I'm David J. Paulé, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for making a difference through your work in positive psychology. Have a great night or a great day. Bye-bye.